Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Trauma Recovery Panel. My name is Emily Kemp. I'm going to be moderating the event. I'm the Programming and Outreach Coordinator at We Are Her. I'm also the host of the We Are Her podcast. And I'm a graduate student at the University of Montana studying social work. So the reason that we kind of decided to have this panel was because we wanted to continue our mission of education, and we'll be sharing the recording with our online community as a resource, especially right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, because it is a heightened time of anxiety and people are unsure. There's a lot of isolating going on. We've heard from a lot of members of our online community that they really are looking for resources to help feel grounded and to educate themselves. So that's kind of our intentions behind the podcast recording. And so now I'm going to go ahead and have all of our panelists introduce themselves. And yeah, if you would like to say your name, I'll just go ahead and start calling people's names. So directly to my right is the one and only China Reavers. So China, if you want to start us off.
Hi everyone, my name is China Reavers and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a member of the leadership team for We Are Her. I am the marketing and event coordinator, and I am here to provide a voice for We Are Her on this panel and just bring a bit of my own perspective.
Awesome, thanks China. It looks like up to my right is Nicole.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Mooring. I am the founder and executive director for Voices of Change 2018, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am here to represent Voices of Change 2018. We are a nonprofit organization who advocates for special needs children who have been sexually abused.
And next up is Michael.
Hello, my name is Michael Broussard. I'm the founder of Ask a Sex Abuse Survivor, and our mission is to amplify the voices of survivors, to provide platforms online and in person where survivors can tell their stories, but can also interact with the people they're telling their stories to. So hopefully we can both empower our fellow survivors and help educate the public. My pronouns are he, him, his.
Excellent. Next up, it looks like Desi.
Desi. I am the CEO and founder of Candle in a Dark Room. We are a nonprofit organization and a podcast. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, and I help victims and survivors basically take their power back by telling their story, and I accompany them in court while they face their perpetrators in court. With my podcast, they tell their stories and use their voice and just help them take their power back in their situation. I have worked as a counselor and crisis worker for over 10 years, and I specialize in trauma with adolescents and young adults. So,
thank you. Next, looks like Terry's up.
Hi, I'm Terry Yuan. I'm a survivor, and I'm a producer and host of the Engendered podcast and founder of the Engendered Collective, which is a community of survivors, advocates, and pro-feminist allies who are working together to engage in knowledge building and knowledge sharing, collective care and healing, and advocacy to end sexism, sexist oppression, and sexist exploitation.
Thanks, Terry. Next is Abrianna.
Hi everyone, I'm Abrianna Morales. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the founder of the Sexual Assault Youth Support Network, or SASN for short, which is an organization that I founded to promote the support, empowerment, and connection of youth sexual assault survivors and those that support them. I'm a survivor myself, and I'm really excited to be a part of this panel because I really want to share that youth and young adult perspective on being a survivor and how that influences trauma recovery. And so I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Cheyenne.
Hi everyone, my name is Cheyenne Taylor Jacobs. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the founder as well as the director of the She Will Speak series. So we are a community that is helping to build education awareness by creating biannual anthologies. Our our first anthology was actually centered on survivorship, and many people actually know me from my work with End Rape on Campus. I am very excited as well to be on this panel and be able to connect with all the folks that are speaking on it. And a lot of my work centers not only survivorship, but how it relates specifically for women of color and folks who are institutionally marginalized as well when it comes to their survivorship.
Thank you. Next up, we have Shea.
Hi guys, my name is Shea Huff. I'm the owner of WIM Consulting. I do wellness work with women and girls, writing and development workshops around setting boundaries and learning how to separate our own needs from the wants and needs of others around us. I am really, really excited to be a part of this group and really just to engage in a conversation around healing and raising and lifting our voices. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you guys, everyone, for introducing yourself. So we're going to move forward with answering our questions. I'm geeking out over here. I'm like fangirling really hard, just like sitting among such an amazing group of people. And I'm really excited to have this conversation as well. And yeah, with that, I think we'll just get going. So our first question, I've got my notes here, is what does trauma recovery mean to you? What does trauma recovery mean to you? And I have Shea and Nicole answering this question. So Shea, if you want to kick us off, that'd be awesome.
This was a really interesting question for me because I always think about like, you know, my brain wants to go to the larger scale of the question. And one of the things that I have to remind myself is that I always have to bring it back down to earth and make my whatever I say about these things very personal and bring it back down to the individual level. Because I don't know what trauma looks like for other people, right? And therefore, I don't know what your recovery looks like. So the idea of what it means to me is a really, really good question. You know, when I first started trying to like dig into the cobwebs that are my trauma, I really wanted to know from other people what their process was and how they healed. And I spent a lot of time trying to make my recovery look like other people's recovery. And what I found over the last few years is that that's actually kind of impossible. For me, trauma recovery is about getting to know myself, right? It's about looking at all of those nooks and crannies, all of those dark places within me that I've run from or hidden from or didn't even know existed over however long, right? And so this idea of becoming friends with all of the versions of Shea, all of the hurt aspects of Shea, getting really curious about my anger, getting really curious about my sadness, getting really curious about my, I don't know what that feeling is, and sitting with that. That has birthed for me a kind of, and I can't even really call it recovery. It's for me, it's more of a journey. I would call it a trauma healing journey. I don't know that I'll ever fully be recovered, right? Because the deeper I go, the more stuff I discover, and I'm learning to be okay with that today. But I think what's been most important for me is to really come to understand that I have to know myself, right? That simple phrase of know thyself, that has been, coming to that understanding has been the biggest jumping off point for me. Because I don't necessarily, how do I put this into words? It's like doing shadow work. If you're familiar with that, it's coming to this understanding that we are the dark and the light. And my trauma is part of that. Whether I want to call it the dark or the light, either or, you know, that's totally up to me. But being able to look at all of that and accept it, that has been the place that I've come to where I'm able to sit with my trauma, not necessarily try to get rid of it, not necessarily try to heal it, but sit with it, right? Make friends with it. I talk to friends about this, or people that I work with, about the concept of inviting my trauma, inviting my pain to the dinner table and sitting down with it and breaking bread with it, because that's what I need in order to heal. And maybe that resonates with other people, maybe it doesn't, but that's been what my process looks like. And so whether I heal or not through that has become a little less important to me. It's the looking at it that has really given me the space to, you know what I mean? Breathe. And that's that's when I hear trauma recovery, I have a hard time with coming to terms with that, because it's just so much bigger than that. It goes so much deeper than that for me. And so when I work with people, I really try to encourage them that deep inner curiosity. That's the part I want you to grab onto, because the more you know yourself, the better you are to be able to manage, right? Well, I know when this happens, I get triggered and I do this. And so what's the thing that I do to take care of myself in that space, right? Or when I hear this thing, my brain automatically goes here and then I spin out. And so I know that happens. And so what's the thing that I can do in this space, right? And is that healing, or is it management, or is it a little bit of both? I don't know, right? Figuring out what works for me, though. Maybe learning a little bit from you, you know, but more so, how does it resonate deep in my core, in my soul, and can I sit with it for a little while and breathe through it? I feel like that was a little bit of a roundabout way to get to a very simple answer, but that's what I got.
I appreciate. Now, how do I follow that? A lot of what you said resonated with me, honestly. As I mentioned before, both of my kids were victims of sexual abuse, and unfortunately, I can't go into everything right now as I would like to, because the story's too long. But what I've also discovered in trying to help them heal was my first husband was abusive to me. And as time's gone on, as I've tried to help them heal, I have discovered things along the way that I didn't remember. And a lot of memories repressed for myself. So as Shea was saying, you know, there's a lot of things, then you're trying to take some steps back and try to determine how do you accept it and how do you deal with it so you can move forward and you're not stuck in the same spot or you're not taking steps back. And that's been difficult because for me, it's not only trying to help both of my kids, it's helping myself too. And I didn't realize I kept just putting myself off because, you know, now I have two kids that I have to be responsible for, and their health and wellness is so imperative for me to advocate for and to fight for justice for them. But it was also important for me to really take a good look at myself to say, you know, if I don't heal myself, what good am I to them? And I didn't realize that. I just kept thinking every day, no, it's okay. You know, I was very depressed and the anxiety and, you know, just not talking about it. And that wasn't good. I wasn't being as effective as I should have been. And now looking back, I should have done things differently, but I can't go back. I can't live in the past. But so my road to recovery has been much different because I've had three of us to worry about and fight for. And my fight has been so strong for my son, which is why we started Voices of Change. And it's been so unfair, and the discrimination has been so incredibly difficult. So we've really had a lot of things challenges that we've overcome and hoops that we've had to jump through. So for me, that journey to recovery, and to Shea's point, I don't know that I'll ever fully recover, but it's that point of getting to the acceptance and taking it day by day and not comparing yourself to others, because there are no stories that are the same. I think it's healthy to talk to other people, but to stop comparing yourself and your story and your situation, because there's never going to be a carbon copy to anyone else. You can have relatable situations and you can have that empathy, but I found when I stopped doing that, that really was healing for me. And I think that's probably, I hope I'm answering the question. But I really think that for me was really the best answer I can give in my unique circumstances.
For sharing and being so like personal and vulnerable, both of you. I really appreciate it. I think you've set us off on a really powerful start. And so we're going to keep moving along and answering more questions and hearing from other folks on the panel. So question number 2 is at We Are Her, we're all about healing, empowerment, and restoration. Of these things, which do you believe is most important for trauma recovery and why?
So as I mentioned before, I am a survivor of child sexual abuse for many years. And so for me, this was a really important question for me to answer because this was a huge part of my healing. And this is something that I think is a huge part of the survivors I work with on a daily basis. For me, which do you believe is most important for trauma recovery? So for me, definitely empowerment. So empowerment, because without taking our power back from our perpetrators, we will never truly heal. And that is why I go to court with victims who face their perpetrators in court, because there is nothing more healing and powerful than facing the person that hurt you in the eyes and saying, you took my past, but you will not take my future. There's nothing more powerful than that. And it's like I said, I love seeing that and seeing them walk out of the courtroom, which is like the weight lifted off their shoulders from that. Also, sorry, I take notes because I didn't want to like ramble. So we, like I said, we have to have that to be able to like fully, truly heal. We have to take our power back. And, you can't have one without the other. And so for me, once you take your empowerment back, then you can then it's the restoration. And you know what I mean? For me, that's like just so important. And then healing is last, because you can't heal until those things are done. And so it has to be in a certain order from what I've noticed for you to truly get to that fully healing spot. So yeah, I definitely think the number one thing for any survivor is to take that power back and to remember who you truly are before your trauma, who you truly are now because of your trauma. Yes, people, we change after our trauma, but the power in us, if anything, it gets more fired up, and that just is so empowering to be able to stand up for yourself, look yourself in the mirror and be like, I'm fighting for you and I'm fighting for justice for us. And so yeah, definitely empowerment's the first one, then restoration, and then healing. It has to be in that order for you to truly get to the other side of healing.
Thank you for your perspective. I'm going to keep rolling and let Terry jump in.
So my answer to this was none of the three. And I speak from the perspective of a domestic violence and coercive control survivor who has a child with her abuser. And I can't even use the word shares a child because he treats our child, like property. And so what I think is the most important is looking back to the origins of the feminist movement and the battered women's movement is consciousness raising. And I don't believe that we can really have real or sustained healing or empowerment unless we have a recognition and acknowledgement of the forces, both within our relationship as well as systemic, that have contributed to enabling our relationship, blaming us for the experiences we have and our trauma reaction to it, and keeping us from actually being fully restored. I don't believe that restoration is possible once you're broken. The crack is there. You may glue it back together, but there's always going to be that piece of you that is basically missing, and you're just managing your trauma. Um, and the consciousness raising is important so that you have a recognition that it's not your fault, that you can begin to start thinking of a long-term safety plan potentially for people who are still in the relationship, and not be in the sort of spiral of making excuses for the abuse that you're experiencing or put for the perpetrator. And so I think that is the first step to empowerment, to healing, and potentially to, managing the experience.
Thank you both so much. And moving on to question number 3. Here we go. What narratives are you tired of hearing about trauma recovery and survivorhood? And what would you like to say about it so you never have to answer it again?
So my answer for this, right, that I'm personally tired of hearing, and it's like, if I could say one thing and it's like, don't say this again, is that, I can be both victim and survivor at the same time. And I feel, especially as a Black woman, that giving this survivor resilience, you're strong. My friend actually did something the other day. She was like, describe the qualities of a Black woman without saying the word strong. And I think when you sometimes use survivorship and do all this resilience and strength, what you're actually doing is erasing the systematic stressors, the systematic oppression that actually puts people in these situations. So you're erasing, people of color, the BIPOC community, you're erasing Black trans women, you're erasing the queer and LGBTQX plus community, you're erasing the harm that is done to us just because of our identities by saying, but you're so strong. And, then even in my, recent kind of interactions with people, it lingers, which is, I really enjoyed Terry's answer with that, where, you want to be empowered, you want to do all these things, but at the same time, you understand, I'm just managing at a certain point. So if there's a day where I am just, I like to say in my bag, like in my full bag, just sitting on my bed, upset, reliving, trying to retell this story. It's like, I can do that because this will never go away. And I think, a lot of times we have to give that space. And when you look at trauma, a lot of times when we're looking at, the trauma when it comes to sexual violence, domestic violence, we look at the specific event and we're not looking at all of the trauma that someone had to even endure before they got to that point. We're not looking at the messages they were receiving before we got to that point. So by you saying like, well, you're a survivor, you're strong, you're resilient, you're erasing, like, I'm 25 years old, you're erasing 25 years of systematic oppression that I was putting up with that even got me to this point, and saying, but just keep going. And it's like, no, some days I just want to sit. So one thing I didn't mention in my introduction is I'm a spoken word artist. I had just a random account on Instagram. Now it's like people see me like, oh my God, she will speak, right? And the other day, I think it was yesterday, I was just looking at some of my past poetry about my relationship with sexual violence when I was very much in that victim stage. And it made me really sad because I felt like as of recently, I've been kind of on that line of like survivor and victim, but I had to realize that's okay. And so that would be the biggest narrative that I feel like sometimes, not even sometimes, in trauma recovery, we need to give that space, especially, like I said, when you're dealing with folks who are in a lot of these marginalized communities. Like I said, as a Black woman, we keep telling that we're strong, that way we can erase the fact of all the violence put against us. So it's like, I am many things, but I actually have, as of recently, told people, don't call me strong, don't call me resilient, call me what I am, a vulnerable person that is feeling, that is healing, that is grieving. And to Shea's point with that, and then I will wrap up my answer, it's a lot when you feel like you conquered one demon, and it's like, damn, this box is still opening up, like I thought we went through this already. And it's like when you see them videos and somebody just gives somebody a gift card and the box though is this big, that's the best way I can think about it. It's like, oh my gosh, like I saw a meme, it was like, you're gonna grow from this. It's like me tired of dealing with these things, like, and it's just tears. And that's sometimes what I feel like. And I like comedy, I like to laugh. And I think for me, that's one of the ways I've been able to manage it. And so I would just say that it's okay if you're tired of reopening up these boxes. It's okay to just sit with the box one day and be like, this is a lot. I'm tired. The system is rigged against me. It's true. And you can be both victim and survivor at the same time. And no one should make you feel bad for it. And nobody should force you to just push along in your life as if this, did not happen to you, to both, Desi and Terry's point in the previous question.
Thank you. I think the thing that I keep running up against, both for myself, but also when I'm sort of moderating discussions among survivors and things like that, is this notion that you must forgive your abuser in order to heal. If you don't, you won't heal. And the reality, for me at least, is that forgiving my abuser would be detrimental to my healing. It would actually slow me down. It would hurt me. And this is me saying this about myself. This is the key here. I'm saying I don't need to forgive. In fact, forgiving would be bad for me. I'm not saying you don't need to want to forgive, or you don't need to forgive, or there are other people. Forgiveness takes a weight off of them. You know, it helps them move forward in their healing. So I think the frustration is when you get people who are they're unifocused. You must forgive. You haven't forgiven? No, what? Well, you're not going to heal. You know you're not going to heal because you haven't forgiven. Everyone's different. And we're hearing this over and over again with everyone talking today. Everyone, what you need to heal is different. What you need the whole victim survivor thing. I ran across the victim survivor thriver idea where people go through stages. I don't believe in stages. I believe that we can be all things at once, as you were saying earlier, Cheyenne. And we shouldn't judge each other on the basis of whether we've forgiven or not. We should support each other and say, okay, that's what you need. I'm here for it. I'm definitely here for it.
Yeah, a lot of empowering messages coming from the panel right now. And Michael, yeah, I read that and was like, oh yes, I have heard that a lot, and I think one of the beautiful things of having so many voices at the table right now on the panel for the panelists is just to highlight again how different everyone's experience is. And you really kind of hit that message home, Michael. So I super appreciate that. It's really important for people to understand the complexity and the nuance here. And all of the different ways that there is to exist and also be someone who's experienced trauma. So we're going to move on to question 4 now. I have, okay. How can we advance the survivor community to be more inclusive, specifically regarding healing?
Awesome, thank you. Well, I mean, I really believe that inclusivity in the survivor community, especially regarding healing, has to begin with acceptance. We've talked about this tonight specifically, of just how different we all are and how, I guess, diverse our experiences are and how that influences our healing. The way that I heal is different than the way China will heal. It's different than the way that my parents or my grandparents or other people that I interact with will heal from things. We all have different ways of living. Some of us are spiritual, some of us aren't. Some of us love therapy, some of us don't. Where we lack inclusivity, we lack understanding. As a community, we need to avoid these paradigmatic ways of thinking about healing. It's not always about this kind of, like Michael was saying, this unifocused idea of, oh, you need to forgive, oh, you need to meditate, you need to heal, you need to go talk to this person, you need to have this like timeline, this continuum, like all these kind of expectations we have about healing and these norms we're setting within the survivor community and also from outside the survivor community kind of systemically are things that we need to avoid because we're all so different, and imposing these kind of expectations is just so limiting because healing is, to me, a kind of thing of like rebirth, renewal, and revitalization as a person. Whenever I was sexually abused, sexually assaulted, I had to essentially put away who I was before and rebuild, become a new person. And while, of course, I obviously am the same person, I am fundamentally different. And I think that there's so much potential for filling this kind of space that trauma creates in a beautiful way. And that looks so different. And I feel like being inclusive and being intersectional is so important to allow for so many ways for people to grow. And so we need to be more accepting of those that are approaching things differently than we would, and emphasize that being there for one another, despite these differences, is what matters in the end.
As far as inclusivity in the survivor community, I think that we need to recognize kind of the systems that we're under in terms of toxic masculinity. We also need to recognize that the Me Too movement was created by Black women and then co-opted and popularized by white women. Because until we look at what has been, in essence, like kind of like stolen and reworked, and how that has created like a perfect survivor and a perfect victim. Like right now, victims and survivors can only look one way. We don't have space for BIPOC, for men, for LGBTQ, for those who are disabled, for geriatric. These are all survivors who are in essence invisible. And by leaving them out of the conversation, there's no inclusivity. And so we have to be conscious of the language that we use, of the creators that we support. There's so many, I think, resources out there that are amazing, but that are limited. And by not, I guess, using resources that are amplifying voices like Cheyenne and Shea and Terry and everyone here, we're just supporting people who are perpetrating this one idea of what survivors are and can be. So yeah, I think just recognition of privilege and just everything and how that plays out in recovery and in the messaging about healing, it's all very important. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, not only does it make sense, but I think the way that you can, that message is so clear, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's a message that is lost. And again, like these bigger picture systems and how they touch each other and how it's all working together, like it gets lost. It's just not there. It gets erased. And I'm just like loving everyone sharing. And with that, we'll get moving to question number 5. What cultural messages should I ignore in order to heal from my trauma?
So with We Are Her, we did start kind of hosting affinity groups while we're in COVID, so people can still connect and talk. So I've been doing a lot of the BIPOC affinity groups. And one message that keeps coming up over and over again is just the normalization of behavior. It's just like, this is how it is. This is how our grandparents were and our parents are and how we're going to be. And so we're excusing behavior by normalizing it. And I think I think that's like the main cultural message of just kind of ignoring the normalization of behaviors that are toxic or abusive. Because there is this toxic cycle within a family or within a community, it doesn't mean that that is right. It doesn't mean that that's what has to continue. These aren't patterns that we're stuck in. They're just patterns that we may have been born into or that we married into. So we can escape them. We can change them.
Referring back to, what people are saying now, talking about toxic situations, toxic masculinity, as was mentioned earlier, there is this preconception that men cannot be vulnerable. They have to be stoic. They have to be silent. They can't break down and cry. And I think that needs to be blasted wide open, because men need support and men need the freedom to cry. And also men need to be able, I believe that men need to be able to comfort each other and be tender with each other and supportive of each other, in ways that, the larger toxic masculinity culture looks as unmanly. And I know that among, my fellow male survivors, the people that I know, it's this community of people saying, you know what, we are human. We do need to take care of each other. We do need to hold each other. And I think that particular idea that we can't because it's not manly, is damaging to men trying to heal and trying to find solace and trying to find support. So that's a good example of something toxic that I think we need to do away with. And a lot of people are working real hard to do away with it. And I am so excited about the fact that people are addressing it now.
Yeah, thank you. I think it speaks to this bigger idea that like toxic masculinity is, yes, obviously harmful to people who identify as women, but it's also harmful to men. It's harmful to everybody. And I appreciate your perspective on that and being so vulnerable as to share from that personal place. So thank you. And now we're on question 6. So this question is, how has trauma recovery changed since the Me Too movement, and what changes would you like to see in the next 5 to 10 years? So looking forward, what are some changes that have happened and what you would like to see happen?
Yeah. Well, when I was thinking about this when answering the question, it's kind of like the Me Too movement was in 2017, so that's 3 years ago now. And so it's crazy to see that this has really had time to take a like active role in how we perceive trauma recovery in the past 3 years. And I think it's really given us a chance to talk more openly about it, to be more open about being a sexual assault survivor, with dealing with these issues, and has therefore led to this kind of movement of mindfulness and mental health awareness being more, I guess, uplifted in regular discussions. It's more accepted to say, or more acceptable to say, I'm a sexual assault survivor, I deal with trauma, I have PTSD, I'm triggered. You're more, I think, respected when you're talking about this now. In the next 5 to 10 years, I think, though, I really think we need to focus on inclusivity within, dealing with sexual abuse and activism. Like China was saying previously, the Me Too movement was kind of co-opted by white women to, create this image of the perfect survivor, the right survivor, and that typically, at least from what I've been, the conversations I've had, is a white woman that is high socioeconomic status, and like that's the right kind of survivor to be. That's the valid survivor to be. And I think that needs to be dismantled. I think we need to lift up the voices of marginalized and oppressed groups and hear and learn from all of the different perspectives that are in the survivor community. It's not just how people like me or how people that are white and affluent deal with these issues. It's about everyone. And I think that we need to start having these conversations and to focus more on being intersectional in the way we approach things. And that's really, I think, a good change that we need to start working on.
I definitely think that there's been a lot of change since the Me Too movement came about in 2017. I definitely think we have a long way to go. I can speak to it personally because my daughter was 15 when she was sexually assaulted, and my son was sexually assaulted for about 7 years from the time he was 7. For about 5 years from the time he was 7 till he was 12. And looking from it from a parent's perspective, the justice system was extremely fair to her. She received justice. They cared about what she wanted. Definitely much different look and feel from how my son was treated. And there's definitely a long way to go as far as discrimination, and to everyone's points about talking about inclusivity across the board. It's definitely not there, and it needs to be there. It needs to be brought to light. Again, I can speak to it from personal experience, and it was very disturbing to see firsthand how the justice system treats people differently, much differently. And it's disappointing to see that. It's also disappointing to see that you try and bring these cases to light and to get that attention, not for yourself, but just to bring that awareness to people that these things are happening. It doesn't discriminate. Sexual abuse does not discriminate. And yet you turn on the news, and unless you are in, a high powering position, or someone, in a school system or something like that, you don't hear about it from the general population. And that bothers me too, because why isn't, people like us, just ordinary people, and we're the ones that are trying to raise our voices and to, talk and bring this to light. So I think there's still a lot that needs to change. I definitely think we've, come to light and we're talking about it, but I think there's still a lot that, we need to come full circle on.
To grow. And thank you for sharing your perspective and advocating for your kids. I think that's a really important perspective that we don't hear a lot from as parents, and especially as a parent with a child with special needs. So thank you for bringing that perspective into the conversation as well. So now we are on to question number 7. This one also comes from a We Are Her community member. And the question is, what are some ways to work on building self-trust after trauma? And
Love this question. I mean, I feel like the first thing I have to say about this is, you know, patience is just really a virtue. You know, you really have to lean into patience. That's my personal experience with that. When you have spent the majority of your life learning how not to trust yourself, it's like spending 7 years walking into the woods and then deciding you don't want to be there anymore and thinking that it's only going to take you 2 years to get back out, if that makes sense. It always comes back to self for me, you know. I learn how to trust myself when I learn what that voice sounds like, and I listen to it and I honor it and I make decisions based in that. Not what society has tried to condition me to do, right? Not what my mom wants me to do or my dad wants me to do, or, you know, the people who were, you know, trying to help me heal want me to do. I have to listen to my body. That is really the only directive that I need. But when I'm in that cobwebby, that's what comes to mind, that cobwebby like phase of whatever, you know, and I think we transition in and out of that as we move through life. And everything seems really loud and moves too fast. That's how my anxiety manifests itself. Everything is loud and it moves really fast, and like everything's like this, you know, nothing's still. I can't hear this, right? All I hear is this. And there's a huge difference between my head and my spirit. And I have to learn how to get quiet, right? I have to learn how to, so that I can get quiet, so that I can hear what my spirit has been really screaming for all this time. My body tells me everything I need to know. I know, and it's been taking me a long time. Patience, right? Patience. It's taken me a long time to get here. I know when I am dishonoring my spirit because my body speaks up in the form of anxiety, right? I can't breathe. I feel like I got bricks on my chest. I can't sleep. I'm overeating or not eating enough. I'm snappy with people. I'm in fear. I'm frustrated super easily. My body is like, no, right? And as soon as I stop and I listen to that voice and I take action, it can be a really small action, right? A really tiny action. That's all I need. One little act. My body goes, thank you. And that is what I'm looking for. That silent whisper, right? Or sometimes that, you know, sounds like a silent scream sometimes, but that's what I'm looking for. But that takes practice, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of bumping into other people, right? A lot of bumping into other people. My experience is that really what we're talking about is setting boundaries, right? When I started setting boundaries with other people, some people received it really well and other people didn't. Now, as someone who is naturally nurturing, which gone too far is really codependent, I don't like that. You don't like that I'm setting boundaries, so I back off of them really quickly. Standing my ground, that's part of that practice, and that takes some patience too, right? So bumping up against other people and learning how to breathe through that, right? Not looking for that quick fix, which is to make you happy, even though it doesn't make me feel so good on the inside. Learning how to stand that ground. And that is all a part of the journey, right? I am always going to bump up against people, always, right? Getting quiet, figuring out who I am, knowing who I am, knowing that who I am is going to change and being okay with that. The dark and the light, it's all a package, right? And it sounds so overwhelming, but that's why you take bite-sized pieces at it, right? One tiny action, one tiny decision at a time. And before you know it, you look back and you're like, whoa, look at where I've come from. And sometimes you step off the path. That's okay. You step right back on it, right? All those little teeny tiny decisions add up to me learning what it's like to be in this body and honor this body and honor this spirit, bumping up against other people and all. That's just life, right? That's just part of it. So, like, what do I need to do to be able to be okay with that friction? Um, and if I'm not okay with that friction, what do I do to fix it, right? Like for me, that self-trust involves all of that. And so if I want to wrap my head around that, what I have to understand, and this is just for me, is that it's all part of the process. It's all part of the journey. There is no end game. It's just an honoring of my own spirit, learning what that looks like, what that feels like for me in here, shutting out all the other stuff, if only for just a few seconds, right? Just long enough to take one deep breath and move forward from there. That, all of that, right, is how I've learned what it means to trust Shea. And I'll say, feel like I've been talking for a long time, but I'll close with this. You have to have a community who mirrors that, right? Mirrors boundaries, mirrors listening to themselves, mirrors you are worthy in their action and in their words, right? I don't know that I would be where I am without people saying to me, you can do this all the time, right? Your journey is your journey. I don't know what's right with you, right for you, but I trust that you will figure it out all the time. All the time I needed to hear that. And now I can turn around and do that for other people. And that's a blessing for me. But community, right? Because we don't heal in a vacuum. We need other people for the good and the bad, because that's part of the journey. I've been talking long enough. That's all I got. Thanks.
So I was just reminding myself of the question. So in terms of building self-trust, I I think we need to have every survivor needs her own toolkit. And I say her because I'm referring to me. But and the toolkit isn't something that is fixed. It's something that is fluid, and you might add something and then take something away. So the first toolkit is this, going back to what I was talking about in consciousness, is a framework for unlearning sexism and white supremacy, recognizing the ways in which patriarchy and systemic oppression show up in our lives and have contributed to our experiences of trauma, and may, in my experience, continue to contribute. Uh, and and so that's why it's so important, once you have that framework, that you can then, to what Shea was saying, talking about self-love, then you can start interrogating the ways in which patriarchy sets up women, to care for others more than we care for ourselves, and to always put ourselves last, right? And so my feminist, um, I don't want to like put someone on a pedestal, but I can't think of a better word. My feminist guide is Bell Hooks, and she has a series on love that I think is pivotal. They're feminist texts, but they're also about, healing and understanding the ways in which we have come to move away from caring about ourselves as a primary force. And so once you understand that and you have that framework, hopefully you can then add to your toolkit by having a good trauma therapist. And that takes some work, because not everyone who understands, who says that they are trauma informed, actually have those necessary modalities that they've been trained in, and preferably they should be informed about the dynamics of power and control, so they can have a more richer understanding. And and then finally, I would say, back to what Shea was saying with regard to community. Once you have these tools, building community is important. But for me, it's actually been a very in some ways treacherous experience, because as a protective mom, not everyone who has experienced systemic sexism while trying to leave their abusive partner has an understanding that the experience is rooted in systemic sexism. And so when they start blaming, I don't know, when they start attributing it to things that are interpersonal and to maybe corruption in general, and not recognizing the framework of male and white supremacy, and they might be supporters of super predators who are occupying our White House, that becomes very traumatizing. And so building your community in a way that's very, where you're very careful about how to assess who is safe to be around and share your stories, and build your practice of care, requires, I believe, going back to that feminist lens of unlearning sexism, so that you can be safe.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I think you used the word like interrogating, which I really appreciate it. It's like this rigorous sort of like questioning of the system. And I'm hearing this like bigger theme of like, like experiencing trauma on an individual or systemic level, but then of course those individuals in the systems that are causing the harm are not going to want you to know that you're being harmed. And so there's like a gaslighting effect, not only on an individual level, but the system's going to try and gaslight you too, and minimize and shut you down. So that like, wait a minute, where is this coming from? This like rigorous questioning, the interrogating of the system, like what's real? Because I think, yeah, that speaks a lot to like, if you're having self-doubt and then the system's like, oh, and the perpetrator is like, oh, you should doubt yourself. And then you're like, wait, I'm going to go get help from the system. And then the system's like, no, you should doubt yourself. It's like, wait, it is real, right? So that I appreciate that a lot. And also just want to point out that like the mental health industry can be helpful, and like Abrianna was saying, some people for therapy is helpful, some people it's not. Like there is a mental health industrial complex, and not all therapists and not all counselors are safe. And because that system is also rooted in white cisgendered patriarchal values and hetero values. Like that system is also inherently unsafe for some people. And so it is a matter, and I think like there are some movements that are working to undo that. But I just appreciate like your honesty and with your personal experience around that, because if you do want to go get help from a community or from a service provider, like you have to make sure your values are aligned in that way, or it can be really re-traumatizing. So thank you. Really important points. And with that, we will move on to question 8, which all of these questions flow so nicely. This one is being silenced a form of oppression or re-traumatization for survivors? How can one recover from this type of trauma?
It definitely is. And to lean into actually a prior question with the point Abrianna and China made, which was perfect, that a lot of the times our healing and the movement and our media and everything that kind of says this is who we care about centers cis white women in affluential communities, right? So when you talk about silencing, and I think I love the way Terry kind of like utilize the nuances of both the systematic and the individual level, because I think that's what silencing looks like too. Like when you look at silencing from this institutional level, by you telling me these are the people we're working with, it's like you're already silencing the fact that, okay, well, I don't even need to report because it's not going to make it past your desk. Like you're going to look like from the moment I sit down, it's you don't even need to say anything. And I know I was on a previous panel, and as I said, being someone who's a Black woman, Black American, right? From the day that we had the transatlantic slave trade and people were brought here, touched on this land, because again, when we look at survivorship, when we look at violence, it differs from different cultures, different countries. If this panel was happening somewhere else, the nuances and everything would be different, right? But for me as a Black woman, from that day, from that point in history, my body did not matter, right? So when we talk about silencing in that level, I always hear a lot of people, and I don't think they realize what they're saying when it's like, well, we're going to change the narrative. And I'm like, you can't change something that was never there to begin with. Like I'm a poet, I'm a very visual person. If I break a vase and I say, put this back together, you can, because there's already a structure that's kind of like, okay, we already lean into this, we already value this. But if there was never a vase and I said, put it back together, you're like, well, we need one. So I think when we also look at silencing as a form of oppression, we're not changing narratives for certain folks, we are creating them, which is a lot of labor, which is a lot of work, which is a lot of, I think, even honesty we need in this work to be able to say, I'm gonna be 100 with you. You did not matter in this. We acknowledge that for many years, your body, the color of your skin, your identity, your orientation was not even thought about. So we're not changing that. We have to start it. We have to say, what do you need, right? And when we talk about silencing, and this is, again, stemming from that the systemic, we're also looking at the generations. And I think, to my point, I'm so happy because I've never heard anyone say, like, you don't have to forgive. I was like, oh, thank you. Because, it's just a little hard, trying really hard. And, but when we look at even the generational trauma, we have to understand that a lot of times when we look at communities, the silence from our own community is a way to protect the community as a whole by, like, I don't know if anyone has seen the documentary yet of On the Record, but they did a really great job of explaining, and it was talking about Russell Simmons, right? And it's like, he is this big person in the music industry for the Black community, and how the conversation was, well, wait a minute, we don't want to bring him down because then we're going to bring down the Black community, so y'all have to be quiet. And it's like, well, wait a minute now. So when do we get to talk about what happens? So there are many communities where this happens, where it is, we have to uplift these people because as a whole, systemically, we are oppressed. So I apologize that you might have been abused. I apologize that you might have been sexually violated, but we can't talk about that yet because then this person is going to go down. And it's like, so again, when do I have to get to, sit in this conversation and get justice for what happened? And I think going into the second point, how can we recover? I think on a whole, like, as also like a structural, we have to have people at the table, right? I mentioned the transatlantic slave trade. We don't talk enough about the indigenous folks who our country tries to make it seem like they're not even existing in this country. Who was talking about the violence that us as a system are putting within them, right? And we do not have enough people within these conversations. And even that alone is silencing, because we're saying that you do not matter. And how to heal from it, I think the biggest thing, and Shea, you mentioned it, is that patience. And I would also say taking up space. Taking up space is something I'm learning, something that, a lot of people are like, listen, you have to know what taking up space is for you. And I think the biggest thing, and while everybody was talking, I was like going back in my head at a poem I wrote, and it's really short, but it was, when you're conditioned to chaos, pain becomes a normality. And, I had to realize that pain was so normal, it was almost uncomfortable for peace. Like the days where I felt like I was peaceful, it was like, let me text somebody to kind of put this pain back because I don't know what it was to live outside of that. And that within itself is re-traumatizing. Think about just putting yourself in a cycle of harm because that's what you know. That is the only thing. That is what people told you. And again, going back to the previous question I was asked, even going back to the traumas we've endured up to this point of violence, all we've known is that. So I would say, addressing that, taking up the space, and then community and whatever that looks like. So I tell people all the time, like my phone contacts about 5 people, they have their set time, somebody calls at 8, it's like, oh, you missed your time slot, boo. Like our conversations are at 7. I'm so sorry, we gotta reschedule for tomorrow. But I love my friends. I love the people I get to call my support, my roots. But I also am understanding as of recently that you can have multiple communities. Some of the biggest healing I feel like I've done even over this past few weeks is actually leaning into the folks I've been able to form community with, who themselves are advocates and survivors, because they understand, the details I'm talking about. Like to somebody who that's not their experience, which again is not good or bad. Like I am happy that this is not your experience. I am happy that you don't have to know what I go through. But to them, it might just be like, oh, well, just, move past it, get over it. It's not that big of a deal. but to somebody else, it's like, I understand exactly what you're talking about. And again, to your point, Emily, the mental health that's going in. And I think my last point, even when it comes to the silencing and what does recovery look like, it also, to me, I think we're talking about the gift card in the box now. I think the box I'm at now is coming out of a place where I was silenced. Now kind of, as Shea said, like, this is who I am. It's all or nothing. I have a poem when the line is like, you can't have me at 2 p.m. when everything is great and not at 2 a.m. when it's all falling. You got to do both. But also, what does my story and my identity and who I am even look like in now these consensual relationships? How do I recover from the trauma of being silenced in places where I chose to be and something triggered me? What does that look like? And that is currently for me a lot of unpacking, but I feel like it is, in a sense, healing, because I am learning how to be like, I can't be here anymore. Like, this space is no longer safe for me. This space is in fact becoming harmful, and this space, cannot hold who I am, and that is okay. And I would actually give to anybody that's kind of struggling with that form of being silenced. Like I said, I'm a spoken word artist. Living in my house, some of the poems I wrote, I couldn't share because, as much as I love my family, they're like, why are you talking about this? Why? And as an artist, I don't know if anyone even on this panel listening is an artist, it is very hard to have your artwork just kind of shut down. Like, you don't need to share that. And you're just kind of hiding it away. And so I think I have now been able to just kind of express what that looks like to me and be unapologetic. And then lastly, because I know I said that like 3 times, disclose at my own rate of whatever happens. You don't have to tell your whole story. You could tell different parts. You don't have to be forced to do anything that you don't want to do. It is all about your comfort. And I love the image that you gave, Shea. If you're walking in the woods for 7 years, it's not going to take 2 years to come out of it. And it's sad to say that's okay, because it's some days we want to wake up and be okay, but your journey is just that, your journey. And, silencing is the worst thing that could happen. It happens too much. But I do believe there is a way to kind of recover from the silencing and the re-traumatization that it does.
Silence is 100% re-traumatizing. So for me, first of all, being silenced is re-traumatized because it takes our power and our control away again. Just like when we were victimized, we were already told be silent. We were already told not to tell or keep, shut up or whatever the situation was. And then we were being silenced by our friends and our family, and it's not because it's too much for them to handle. That's like, oh, okay, well, that's a punch in the gut for me. For a lot of years, I stayed silent. Like, my very close friends and family knew, and that was it for over almost 15 years. And I was okay with it because I would, like you, had all this, like you were saying, Cheyenne, had all this stuff going on inside of me, and I was okay with the chaos, that I wasn't ready for the peace, and I wasn't ready to deal with it. And so I just kept the silence, but it was eating away at me. Like, it was literally killing me from the inside out, like my health, everything. And I don't think people understand, like you said, to also is, you do your poetry reading. I've written poetry for years as well. And I remember I tried to tell somebody my story, and they had me burn all of my poetry. And at the time I was like, okay, well, that's good. It was really dark, and I probably shouldn't have, that nobody wants me reading that in a couple of years. But now that I look back, I'm like, no, because that's where I was at that time. Like, I should have kept that, because it was okay that I was in that dark place at that time. And I shouldn't have been silenced for that. I shouldn't have been told that was wrong, and I should get rid of that. So again, I don't think people understand how much of a big difference, not being silenced is. So, barely last year in March, I decided to count with my podcast because I was done. I was done being silent. I just one day woke up and it was just so heavy, and my perpetrator was out of jail, and all this stuff was going on. And I was just like, my head was going to explode, and I didn't know who to talk to about it. I didn't want to talk to my family because it's a trigger for them. It was my old stepdad who did it to me, abused me for 8 years, from age 8 to 15. So for me, it was like, I grew up silent. So I didn't know what it meant to not be silent anymore. I didn't know what it meant to tell people how I was feeling. Even to this day, it's funny because my friends will be like, really, what's going on? And I'm like, I'm fine. I have to remind myself, it's okay to tell them that I'm not okay. It's okay to not be silent right now. It's okay to like be hurt and to feel what I'm feeling. And so what's helped me, and I know it's helped the people that I interviewed myself and other survivors, is you don't need to do it on a podcast, but this is what's helped us, is like, we did tell our story on a podcast, because once that was out there, there was no taking it back. I was free. The freedom of telling my story without being shamed. At that point, it was almost like, I know my family, everybody's going to hear this, but I'm not going to be looking them in the eyes, so it's okay. Like, we'll talk about it later. And so for me, that was so healing, because it's like, once it's out there, it's out there. And I've had literally people like tell their story, and as soon as they're done, just cry before, and they're like, holy crap, like, it's done. There's no taking it back now. Like, my story's out there. And for me, I love that, because it's so freeing. Like I said, that feeling of not being forced to be silent anymore. And I think, working with the industry I work with now, like, I have kids come to me all the time. Like, the reason why they've stayed silent for so long, and the reason why I stayed silent for so long, was out of fear. A fear that I would be shut down, fear that I wouldn't be validated, fear that I wouldn't be heard, fear that I wouldn't be protected, because once I told them what happened, I mean, is he going to kill me? Is this going to happen? How is my mom going to respond? This and that. And so for me, it was once I finally told, and was told by my mom, and was told by my loved ones who were listening to me, like, I believe you. Like, I believe what happened to you was real, and what happened to you happened. And that was so, I remember that day, like, the cop grabbing my hand and looking at me. She's like, I believe you. Like, I believe what you're saying is true. And I've never felt more like weight lifted off my shoulders and free, because for 8 years, I was told to not tell a soul. And so silence is something I think we carry around for a long time. And it's something that takes a long time to heal from, because again, even now, like, I have to remind myself, it's okay to like talk to my therapist. It's okay to call my best friend and be like, hey, I am struggling today. I was triggered. I had a flashback, or this happened, or, I was uncomfortable when this happened, or talk to my husband, like, hey, the way that you grabbed me, the way this was hard, where before I would just deal with it and kind of sweep it under the rug and not talk about it, and hopefully it doesn't happen again with a certain situation. But with me, I've learned as time's gone on, and with the people that I've worked with, is like, it's okay to tell them that you're not comfortable with something, and to not hold that silence anymore. Again, we held that silence for so many years, that we don't deserve that. We deserve to be heard. We deserve to be validated. And so again, the biggest thing for me is, you don't need to go out with a podcast or anything like that, but talk about your situation. Talk about what's happened to you. Even if you don't feel comfortable talking about it with the person, write it down. Get that off out of your head, because I promise, once it's either on paper or out of your mouth, the feeling of that freedom is something that you can't take, like, you can't explain it. So
you for being so vulnerable and speaking from such a personal experience. I know how hard that can be, and I like you're very like use a lot of
I'm
like
very
hands.
animated.
Yes, I love it. But I was seeing you like move your hands over your body a lot, and that like this idea kind of like what you were talking about, Cheyenne and Desi too, like this chaos. It's like I'm almost seeing like mist in the body, and it's just like and it's like hard. It's like this ambiguous chaos, but if you can like put structure and words around it and like get it out of you somehow.
Well, and that freedom of, like she said, the chaos of not being comfortable. Like, I always say this, so, with my podcast quotes and stuff, is like, it's uncomfortable to be comfortable, and it's uncomfortable to be, you know what I mean? And the reason why is because it's more uncomfortable to be, I don't know how to explain it out loud. It's very uncomfortable, but it's comfortable at the same time, because it's uncomfortable that I'm coming out, and that we're saying these things that are happening to us, or we're like she said, calling our friends, hey, I need to come up with some drama, because my life is way too calm right now, and I don't know how to handle this. Like, I'm sitting in this silence, and I don't, like, that happens to me a lot. Well, not anymore, but it did for a lot of my 20s. I would feel like I needed drama, but then it would happen to me, and then I was like, why is everything happening to me? But it's because I feel like I needed it, because I didn't know life without that trauma, without that chaos. And so once I finally was able to like throw in the towel, to be like, hey, Des, it's okay. Like, it's okay to be calm. It's okay to not have this chaos, and it's okay to feel okay inside. You know what I mean? And then once I was able to let go of that, is when I think I finally surrendered to it. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again for those like really deeply personal examples. I think it's really powerful. Yeah, to see it from that personal perspective and through that lens. And it's hard to like be vulnerable and offer up your stuff. So thank you. And yeah, so we're moving on to question 9. This also comes from a We Are Her community member, which is, what surprising mindset is needed to understand trauma and heal?
Healing is never ending, just like all things in life. It's a journey. And also that you don't have to obey like the have to, shoulds, need to, must, like forgiveness or like not being angry. That's one that I think is really invalid, that you're not allowed to hold your feelings as they are. Like, it's perfectly fine to be angry. You should probably be pissed, like some fucked up shit happened to you. So I think you're entitled to that. And that doesn't go away. There's a way that becomes productive and you're functional. You never want it to be detrimental, but this is something that's a part of you and it does shape you. It doesn't necessarily make you stronger, but how you grow and your journey from that will always be a part of you. And I think another thing that's surprising is that you will cultivate a community who loves you and supports you. But even they may not completely understand you or understand what you're going through. And I think it's kind of hard to keep people, because I think at first you're like, I need to be understood. I need for someone to get it. And all of our experiences are so different. You're never going to find someone who understands it perfectly. And some of the people in your life who love you and support you may not have been experiencing anything near it, but that doesn't mean that they're not your community, that they can't help you, that they can't support you. And I think, as Desi said, like letting them know, like, hey, this makes me uncomfortable, or kind of reminding them and teaching them as you go, because those people are very important, even if they don't fully understand who you are.
Good question. What surprising mindset is needed to understand trauma and heal? So you need the understanding that healing, kind of like we've all kind of mentioned, you need to understand that healing through trauma is a lifelong task. It's constant work, and you need to have that open mindset, because I think a lot of times, and I know at least for me, and other people are like, hey, this shit was already 5 years ago. Like, why am I still having bad nightmares? Why is this still bothering me? And we need to have that change our mindset of like, this is a lifelong journey that we are going to have to face and deal with for the rest of our life. And when we say that, I know sometimes it's like, oh, like I remember saying that with a girl I was counseling, and she was like, oh, I never realized that. And it's hard to like grasp that, like, this is something we're gonna have to work through for the rest of our lives, but it is something that you work through. But as you work through it, you heal every single time. You are growing every single time. And so, yeah, it sucks, but from where I was, a couple of years ago to now, I'm a totally different person. I feel like a totally different person. And that's because I've been allowing myself to work through this journey. I've been putting in the work to fully heal myself. And also it doesn't mean you're weak. And I think that's another thing that those of us who struggle with this, either flashbacks or nightmares or other things like that, anxieties, we're like, oh, if I just took 10 steps back, why am I'm depressed? Why do I feel like this? Like I already know what to do. I already know how to work through this. And that's been hard for me. That's something that I struggled with last year after some things happened and I had to report again and all this stuff. I was like, well, I just took 10 steps back, and now I have to basically start over. And that wasn't the case. I was able to stop in my tracks, look at myself and be like, no, like, you worked your ass off to be where you are today. And yes, this is something that you're going to have to go over this little bump, but it doesn't mean that you're way at the bottom of the hill again. Like, you can still continue to stay at the top. And so I think that that's really important for those of us to understand, is like, it's a lifelong journey. It's something we're going to constantly have to work on. But if we change our mindset of like, it's okay, I'm growing every single time. It's okay because I'm helping others who are in the similar situations. And that for me has been like, I remember being younger and literally like crying and being like, why is this, like, why am I here? Like, why is this my purpose in life? This and that. And now I've had my answer of like, holy crap, like I went through what I did to help other people who are in the same situation, for other little girls and boys who are being abused by their stepdad or something. Like that is what my purpose is in this. And yeah, it sucks that like that was what I was called for. But then at the same time, I honestly can't say it's something I would change if I could, just because of, I don't know who I'd be if my past wouldn't have happened. I'm who I am because of my past that happened to me. And I'm the mom that I am because of what happened to me. I'm the friend that I am because of what happened to me, you know? And so, yeah, I think mindset is huge on our healing and recovering, because if we don't have that mindset to accept things that happen to us and be okay with it and love who we are because of it, then I think that's something that's going to hold you back for a long time. So
thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, your words are, it's like the iterative process of healing, which I think is important to revisit all the time.
Specific barriers to trauma recovery have you faced, and how can we make sure we do better for survivors in the future? Well, for me, the barriers that we faced, as I mentioned before, was there weren't a lot of supports, resources, anything like that for our circumstances because of my son being disabled. So that was really challenging, because there wasn't supports to help him, for every facet, you know, from the trauma recovery, for psychological, for the cognitive behavioral piece, resources, supports, you know, within the community, and then for my husband and I. So, you know, and for our family. So that was huge, because you can find them for, you know, other kids. And even though we have a child advocacy center, there wasn't, and we did go through that for the forensics, there wasn't that piece when we were done for the additional things that we needed that are so imperative to begin that healing process and that journey, which was disappointing because I didn't know what to do. I had no idea. All of a sudden, out of the blue, he comes to me and discloses this. So it became an everyday occurrence that I was just researching and trying to find things, and I kept hitting brick walls. And I don't want any other family to ever go through that. So that's how this, you know, Voices of Change came into fruition. And my goal is to make it better for survivors in the future. And, you know, I hope that there's others that will join us in the efforts to help the disabled community. Because it was just so disappointing to know that you have to face that as it was for your child to go through that and then not have those needed supports in place already.
And especially Nicole, for sharing such personal information. And I know that can be triggering and hard. And so I just deeply appreciate that. So we are now moving on to question 11. Healing in isolation is hard even before COVID-19. So for you, what does trauma recovery look like right now in isolation? And are there any benefits to isolation?
Well, I think healing is very introspective, which I think is kind of natural to assume, given that we're all kind of isolated and alone, that I'm, you know, kind of sitting here and just thinking about things. And this, you know, is a discussion we just had about how trauma is a lifelong experience is really kind of plays into that. I heard an advocate, like a friend advocate of mine, say this phrase that's always stuck with me is trauma is something that we don't move on from. It's something that we move with as we continue to grow and change and get older. And I was sexually assaulted when I was 15 years old, and I'm turning 19 in a few days. And so the past 4 years have been a crazy experience, you know, dealing with the justice system, my own perceptions of things, and that's constantly changing. And I think that COVID and this isolation has removed me from my normal day-to-day life in a way that's, you know, like limiting those ways I could distract myself. I'm not, you know, going to classes, I'm not going to parties, I'm not doing those things that I was doing before. And not that they were maladaptive coping mechanisms to distract myself, but I'm having to kind of sit with my feelings a bit more and sit with this, you know, reframing of what I think about what happened to me. And I think that's something that happens no matter how old we are, how far we are away from what happened to us. it's kind of sitting here and having that time to reflect and realizing I'm not as okay as I thought I was. I thought, when I was 15, that by the time I was 19, I'd be over it, I'd be done. And as I'm getting older, as I'm here, I'm realizing that's not the case, and that even though I'm over it in ways that I wasn't when I was 15, not crying every day, I'm not having those really strong, like, nightmares, triggering kind of episodes. I'm not having those anymore, but I'm having much more deep and introspective thought over how my experiences have influenced me, and realizing that I'm not always going to be in an okay place, and that this time is permitting me to take a look at that and to change that. And so I think that being in isolation has some benefits because it really permits us and kind of, I guess, forces us to rework and reconsider the ways that we're dealing with our trauma and how that's manifesting our day-to-day lives. It's not like, I'm not going to work and just kind of like, being busy for part of the day and then coming home and then, doing stuff and then going to bed and kind of whatever. And now I'm having to sit here and think about it, and I'm reading more, I'm revisiting these things in my mind more. And so I think that I guess reworking my self-care practices, reworking my mental health, and just like revisiting that. And I think that even though COVID has been so stressful, it is such a stressful thing for everyone in so many different ways. I think that it has given me like a nice little pause and kind of a way to look at myself in a like self-reflective and really introspective manner. And I think that's really valuable for a lot of people if we have that ability to sit and reflect on it. Just checking in where we are and taking this like worldwide kind of stressful down moment to see what we need to do to continue to get better.
I think one of the things that we haven't really touched upon so much in this panel so far is the physiological impacts of trauma, and the fact that for lots of people with trauma, especially domestic violence survivors, and then when you add on top of that, if our children are also have experienced or are experiencing child abuse or child sexual abuse, there's additional layers of trauma that we're managing and other people's trauma that we're managing. So there's I mean, no one that I know who's a domestic abuse survivor who does not have PTSD and who doesn't have physiological symptoms that are chronic. And so under COVID, the sedentary nature of being in isolation has exacerbated some of those physiological symptoms. I don't think as much the psychological for me. So the cycle of pain and the severity is has been, I think, exacerbated in a way that makes it hard for me to be as productive as I was professionally before COVID. And then the other aspect is, man, I'm sure people have read that COVID has been weaponized against survivors who are sharing children with their abusers, as an excuse for not having survivors spend time with their children because of safety concerns or otherwise. And for many of us who are still in court, as I am, it's delayed court proceedings, and so it's delayed any ability for making changes that we were hoping to make through the court process. And so that has created additional triggers that we have to manage as well. And so on the benefit side, well, I should say also, because everybody's isolated at home, it's actually created a situation where I'm working every day, but I get to spread it out throughout the day. So 7 days a week I'm working, but in between I might, take a break because physically it becomes difficult for me to stay seated. Uh, and and so the benefit is I have that flexibility that I wouldn't have had, had we had to report to a traditional office space. Um, and um, and I'm able to be more selective about the kinds of people that I'm choosing to spend time with, because I am managing so much that I'm more um, selective, but also more, in a way, more easily triggered. Because when I do encounter a space that I find to be misaligned with my values, um, I'm also trying to manage the goal of being open and understanding and being in a place of learning. And so I'm sort of, negotiating that tension all the time, and not just kind of like cutting, situations off. And so that's additional issue that I'm dealing with as well. So there are positives and negatives, just like pre-COVID.
Yeah, definitely a mixed bag. And thank you both for speaking to that. I know it's a theme that's been coming a lot in the We Are Her community, whether people are reaching out and asking questions or requesting certain accommodations because of COVID. And so we just wanted to make sure that we're kind of addressing that right now, because it is so relevant to the survivor experience and like the global experience, but there are special considerations, I think, when you're thinking about trauma and isolation. So thank you. All right, we've got 2 questions left. So the question is, many trauma survivors have a hard time feeling safe in their bodies. What are some ways to feel comfortable in your own skin again?
Up until recently, because my friend and partner started a new job, not a romantic partner, but different kind of partner. I had actually been doing yoga since the lockdown in March until the end of August, every day, which is shocking for me. It wasn't a lot, but 30 minutes a day, but it was a way to have structure. It was a way to make sure that I was putting something, doing something with my body and being mindful, um, and offsetting sort of the sitting all the time that you're doing when you're at your desk at the computer. Um, and and because I was doing yoga with her every day, there was someone who you could check in with, who was kind of your emotional support. And so that was something that I think has been a big source of help for me to manage the situation.
I have in my life, because of the abuse, have had to manage a combination of body dysmorphic disorder and dissociation. And the dissociation, was a knee-jerk thing. I didn't know what was happening as a child. I was leaving my body because I couldn't bear the experience of the abuse I was going through. So I separated myself from my body. My body was where the pain was, and I didn't want to be there. Also because of being subject to a lot of emotional and mental abuse and bullying and abuse at home as well, about my physical appearance, left me with body dysmorphic disorder, which I'm not comfortable in my own skin. I don't like to see myself in the mirror. So I'm trying to stay, I still deal with dissociation. I'm trying to stay out of the body where the pain is held. And this is all subconscious. And also to try consciously to find some way to be comfortable as who I am. And this is going to seem like a little bit out of left field, but it's my personal experience. I happen to go to sci-fi conventions and I dress in cosplay. And when you dress up as a character and you go to a convention and you're shy as all can be, as all get out, and you don't want to talk to people, but if you're dressed up, people come up to you. They say you're amazing. They say you look fantastic. They want to take pictures with you. You end up making new friends. For somebody who doesn't like the way I look or doesn't like the way I feel in my own skin, that is incredibly deep therapy. It leaves me feeling at the end of a day like that, actually comfortable for a day, which is astounding given that I'm 55 years old and I've been dealing with these issues all of my life. So, I don't know whether that's something that people can go and immediately implement, but I think that it certainly has been a benefit to me.
And Michael, about that, I love going to festivals for the same reason, because you're like wearing glitter, or just like whatever you want, and people are like, "I love you, you're amazing," and you're like, "Yes." So I definitely, I definitely understand where you're coming from with that, and yeah, I think I know a lot of the answers that a lot of people gave were like mindful movement, rest, and eating, which I think are very important. Like, I love to dance. That's a huge kind of therapeutic movement for myself in yoga and whatnot. But I think also giving yourself permission to be bad is even more important. Some days you don't want to get out of bed. Some days you only want to eat junk food. Like, that's the perk of being an adult, that you can eat what you want, that you can sleep in late, that you can, not that you can be a little bad. And I think, especially with healing, there's so many things that we want to do. We want to take care of ourselves, and there can be a lot of self-criticism and shame. And as long as it's not unhealthy behaviors, I think it's great to engage in things that just make you feel good and that aren't necessarily good. So that's it for me.
Answers everybody gave. And I think something that's very important with these questions is to know, like, the aspects of, as you take these steps, right, feeling comfortable in your skin is different. So it's like, when you first start, it's like you're in crisis stage when you come out of violence. Like, the crisis is, we just want to make sure you're not maybe self-harming yourself, you're not doing things that are dangerous. And it's like, that is like the first concern. Being comfortable is just making sure that you're making it day by day. And then you get to a point where being comfortable is, kind of, I think what everyone said, like, I can look in the mirror and like what I see. I could touch my body and not be like, oh my God, I still feel, these things that happen to me. And so for me, stepping into my craft as a writer, as a poet, is helpful because, for like years, I've been seeing especially when we were talking about mental health, right? I am privileged that I have the access to be able to see a therapist. And I tell people all the time, you can have all the access to things in this world, but that still doesn't mean you will not struggle, and it still won't be setbacks, right? So it's like, I went through 3 therapists, been seeing the same therapist for 2 years, and she's been like journal from like day one. And then finally, getting at a higher vibration, I'm like, I'm gonna start journaling. And I promise you, she sat back in her chair like, I've been telling, you know what, we ain't even gonna go over this. I'm just gonna like jump on the moment and like just give you things to write about, right? But because I am a poet, like I did the other day, my poetry is my journaling. And I think one of the most, to go back to like, Desi and Nicole's point of being empowered, even if you feel you took steps back because you didn't, one of the biggest things I've learned is you don't start from ground zero, you start from ground experience. So guess what? I might have stumbled, but as opposed to being sad for 2 months, I was only upset for a week. That's ground experience, right? Is understanding that, like, my work, when I first started, like my Instagram, if you scroll back, you can hear and see, like, this was somebody that was struggling. This is somebody who was in pain. This is somebody who honestly probably, when someone saw this poem, should have like called probably a professional, like they need help. When I see my work now, it is more like, F the system. Why is this still happening? Who is gonna do X, Y, and Z? Like, and I have to sometimes remind myself. And so I think that is something, writing is, I think, a very good tool. And I always tell people, whatever your craft is, you should do. But if you can write, if you could take time to journal, even if it's like, and I date everything I do, like, even if it's like, I be taking scrap papers on my job and just write different things. And I think even in an uncomfortable way, like the way Desi pointed out before, and this is like my, second point to that, because this is where it comes down to, again, whatever, and I should say this, it is the stage you're at. So the stage I'm at now is where a lot of my friends are like, bet, do you want to get better? Like, are you ready to step into the season of you loving yourself? So that looks like a lot of unpacking. And that looks like, and I'm sure, I don't know if anyone's felt it. I think, again, I was a poet. I did theater. I was in all the plays in school. I love theater. I love dressing up. I love all that, right? The way my mind processes things is like, I tell people, if you see me talking to myself, it's a staff meeting. Just don't interrupt. We got to figure out our next move. Like, it's a staff meeting. But it's like, I'm like, okay, you're right. But what about this point? And I had to, like, I was even at my job yesterday and I cried because I was like, I I apologize that we could not control what happened, because you hear these thoughts in your head and we're often afraid to do that part of being comfortable in your own skin, which is sometimes taking that step into listening to that voice that's like, how could you let this happen? And again, we try to silence it ourselves, but I think I'm at a healing place now. Again, this is like a decade, like we're looking at over like 5 to 10 years later, right? With my personal story, to be able to say, like, I am at a place where I want to sit with these voices and not just silence them, but to understand, if I want to be the comfort I want to be within myself, within Cheyenne, I have to listen to what they're saying and be like, I understand, I'm sorry, I apologize, but this is the season that we're shifting into now. And that, again, is a more uncomfortable answer. That is a more like a long-term, what does your comfort really look like? Because you are at some point maybe having to look at unpacking that stuff. But again, that does not have to happen 2 days after you experience trauma. That is, I'm sure a lot of us on the panel can agree, that is sometimes a year journey. That is a decade journey. And that is okay. So that is, I just wanted to give a 2-part answer of like an immediate, write it down, do yoga, but also the long term. When you get to that stage, you might have to open up these things like, okay, I'm going to listen to the voices and really confront what is happening in myself.
The analogy of like, you're in a staff meeting, that resonated deep. And like, yeah, almost this personification of the inner voice, and like, it gives something tangible to do with it, to like have a conversation with it. Yeah, that's just very powerful language. Thank you so much. And actually stay warmed up, because you and Terry are answering our last question. Don't get cold. So the last question we have for the panel is, what does trauma recovery look like for survivors who can't remember their trauma or have severely fragmented memories of their trauma?
I think something that's important, and Terry touched on it, the last question she did, was the physiological aspect of that. Your body knows, and your mind does know somewhere in the subconscious, and our minds are very powerful. I'm like a big person on like a lot of different things. I'm a very spiritual person, but I also like to know the way things work. I like neuroscience. I like, understanding how sexual violence, domestic violence is some of the highest level of trauma that anyone can face. Like, and they say, I was just talking to my friend about this, people get into car accidents every day and they don't even remember which way they were turning. They're like, which way did you turn, left or right? And they're like, honestly, I have no idea. So if someone can be in a motor vehicle accident and forget where they were going, forget what was happening, I feel we put too much pressure on survivors to be like, please detail me every event that happened, right? And the biggest thing I can say is, don't feel shameful for that. And I think to keep that healing, because what I have found in my personal journey is those things do come up. Even like I said, looking at past traumas and how maybe they impact. So I'm at a place, so I was brought up in the church, right? I'm very grateful for I'm enjoying being a spiritual person, but I've had to realize that a lot of even the victim blaming I did was because I did like the purity service. Like I'm talking about, I got the ring, the card, you're going to pledge your virginity to God and your husband, all of this. And now when that came up, it's understanding how, like a year after that, I experienced my first form of sexual, misconduct. And I totally erased it until I started really diving into my own journey. And this thing from middle school came back up and I'm like, whoa, I totally forgot about that. And understanding that in a sense, the mind does that because it does want to protect you. It's like, this is hurting what you are trying to do, so we're going to block it out. But when your body and everything feels like maybe it's out of place, or maybe you're unpacking these boxes, it's like, let's bring this back up. And so I think the biggest thing is understanding that you do not feel shame if you feel like the pieces are scattered or that you're forgetting. Again, it's actually, I think it's called the peripheral memory, a lot of times does go away. You don't remember certain things. It's the body's and mind's way to just survive what is happening to you. But understand that, and I think a lot of people said on the panel already, the pain that you sometimes feel, like a lot of trauma sits in our neck, it sits in our back, sits in the lower back, it's sitting there. So what does that healing still look like? And again, it could be decades until maybe some of these thoughts come back up. And going back to before, don't let anybody shame you for that, because you are believed, your story is valid. no one should piece it together like, oh, well, you can't remember this detail. That's perfectly fine. Because like I said, I have experienced details coming back up years later, whole incidents coming back up decades later. So this is speaking not only from like an advocate and a research standpoint, but this is also speaking from like sitting in my bed and being like, I totally forgot that erased the whole incident from my mind.
So I'm going to interpret this question in a more nuanced way as a protective mom. Certainly, I have my own experiences of fragmented memories. Big parts of my, now it's been 16 years, the past 16 years I've been involved and continue to be involved in family court. So big parts of my life in the past 16 years, I don't remember. But I have adopted, I don't know that I've actually implemented in practice, but at least I've adopted this mindset that it's important for me to be aware of what I put into my body, how I treat my body, um, who I spend my time with, what keeps me um, in a place of equilibrium, I should say, because a lot of people were talking about joy, and for me, it's really hard. I don't even know what joy is still. So that's like a aspirational thing, but for me, it's about just managing to get up every day and do what I need to do. And the nuanced part is that for your child who maybe is living with their abuser still, and doesn't have a consciousness, and is maybe trauma bonded to the abuser, I need to do this. And I heard this advice years ago, or many, many times, that I didn't really understand or internalize it until now. You need to be well so that you could help your child recover as well, and be there when they're able to and willing to develop that consciousness of their own experience. Because if they are, being exposed to abuse still, they they're going to be struggling. Potentially it might be a generational challenge that you're going to have, which I obviously want to cut. And I've seen children who haven't been able to um, confront their own trauma and the reasons for their trauma, just be in this spiral of self-blame and blaming also the victim, the protective parent. And so to me, managing all of that disassociation and fragmented memories is adopting hopefully a mindset and a practice of understanding how your body works, self-care in your relationships, in the things that you choose to spend your time doing, in learning, and being able to be centered possibly for your child.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. As someone who doesn't have kids, it's always an important reminder to be considerate of that, and that their memories are different than an adult brain. So thank you. And so right now, I did want to move into just a quick Q&A. I know we're running over time, and I thank you guys so much for hanging tight. I think all of the information that you've given is just so invaluable that I just did not want to cut anything short or cut anything. It's just really important that this information is out there and that your voice is out there. So what I'm going to do is just maybe ask for our attendees if they have any questions. I'm going to take like maybe 3 or 4. And attendees, if you want to direct a question specifically at a certain panelist, if there's something that they said that you wanted to follow up on, you can do that. Or if there's a general question, raise your hand, panelists, and we'll have a couple people answer. But hopefully we can kind of get through this piece a little bit quickly so we can wrap up. I want to be respectful of people's time, but I do want to give attendees an opportunity to ask questions. So attendees, if you have a specific question you want to ask, you can pop it into the chat box. In the Q&A from Raw Armor, I have those of us who were assaulted from before we could walk, our foundation was coded, for a lack of a better term, to have the mentality of someone who is disposable and unworthy. I began my Rewrite the Narrative campaign to focus on not on restoring our inner selves to who we were before, as some of us would still be horribly broken or likely relapse, just a thought on flipping the script for healing, to shift the focus away from victimhood into survivorship. Oh, I love that. It's definitely, it's not a question, but it's definitely a very important perspective. So thank you for throwing that in there. From Amanda, I have, how is there a difference between recognizing it, that it will be a lifetime journey, and being defined by it though? Because I want to reject the power it has over me so much. Okay, so the difference between a lifetime journey versus being defined by it. Does anybody want to speak to that? And Michael, I'm going to choose you, so I'm going to click lower hand and you can take it away.
That's actually got me thinking deeply about that whole concept, because it's a conversation that comes up a lot. You know, I am not my abuse. I am not that experience. I will not go through the rest of my life as a victim or as somebody who's been abused, and that's who I am, and that's what I am. That's a real subtle distinction. I like what was being said earlier about recognizing that the abuse is part of us, and that the body is dealing with it, the mind is dealing with it, the soul is dealing with it over time, and that recovery isn't a journey that ends. It's an ongoing journey, as several people have said now. As to being defined by it, for me, I separate the two as, you know what, I'm acknowledging that this has had a major impact on who I am as a person, but I will not let it define what I can do or what I can be as a person. So yes, I'm in constant recovery from childhood sexual abuse, but that will not stop me from doing things like I talked about the cosplay thing. I'm also a musician. I make original music. I wrote the first initiative that Ask a Sex Abuse Survivor ever had back in 2014 was an interactive show that I wrote about my own abuse. So that was me saying, you know what, I'm a theater artist and I'm going to use this to communicate. But what defines me is not the story. What defines me is the tool and my ability to learn and grow and help other people grow from it. So I see both of these things. I see, you know, it's a constant journey, but there's so many things along that journey that you can say, you know what, this is not going to define me. This is not going to be who I am.
So and Michael, I loved your answer on this. And I do think that aspect of journey and it defining you is a very fine line, right? And so I would first like to say, give yourself the grace of like sometimes swaying on that line. But for me, what I'm seeing, so, you know, I actually, when I was kind of going back, you know, feeling like I was in the stage of victimhood just even a few days ago, and I was like looking through social media, and like I took time to find, you know, my perpetrators, like a picture of him on like my college campus from like 2015. And I sat there and I looked at it, and I had to, again, this is the staff meeting I had to have in my head, because I had a poem from a few, like a year or two ago that I shared with one of my friends the other day. And it was like, I just was so bothered. And I had to get to a place where I just admitted, I am so bothered that these people I feel get to be happy and I am here. And I think kind of to Michael's point, I had to tell myself, you can't be focused on that, because now like these people never had ownership of me. And, you know, I've heard this phrase a lot, I'm not giving you free space in my head, and I'm going to manage. This will be a journey. There are going to be days that are hard. But I think for me, and this is like, again, everybody's at a different spot. This is, you know, because if it wasn't for even this experience, I don't think I would have even maybe had the thought to start something like the She Will Speak series, because it started because I was posting poems about my own sexual violence experience. People started DMing me their stories and their poems. So I said, what if there was an anthology where people could put this all together and we could really say that this is not just statistics on a computer, these are real people. That's how I ended up working with End Rape on Campus. And I can honestly say I am so happy to be able to be in this advocacy work, to be able to bring space and to different people. But I also acknowledge that, which is an uncomfortable acknowledgement, again, this is for myself, that person before all these incidents, it's not that she does not exist, and it's not that she was broken, she has different shapes. And what does it look like? Because I think something that stops, and this is even just moving on an outer lens of a lot of trauma, sometimes we try to get back to the person we were before a lot of these things happen. We try to get back to them. And I feel like even that in itself is kind of being defined by it, because you're still admitting to yourself, this has shattered my life. And it may just have. I still feel like in certain ways, it's like, I don't know who I would have been without it. But do I want to sit there and ponder that for the rest of my life? Do I want to sit there and still feel like these people have the ownership of my mind? Or do I maybe want to get uncomfortable and be like, Cheyenne wants to be happy. She wants to feel joy. And like, Terry, I'm so happy that you even were very transparent of like, what is joy? Someone asked me, what is joy? I sat there for 15 minutes like, is it this? Is it? And they're like, you don't know what joy is? No, I don't think I actually experienced that. But then I had to tell myself, but I want to. And am I willing to sometimes just get uncomfortable? And again, joy might not come today. It might be finalized a year from now. So I think that would be my answer to that, is just really kind of being okay with that fine line and swaying on it, but understanding that it does not define you, because every day you're going to get up and make the choice that I'm choosing me. And that within itself is not letting it define you.
Thank you so much. I think we do get caught up in like the details of what exactly does this word mean, and exactly how do I like identify with it, and what boundaries does it put around me. And I love the like flexible way that you're like, no, you can like be all up inside the word and however it means like healing for you. So yeah, the fluidity of that is really liberating. So thank you for like offering that perspective. I think we're going to move on to the last question. I'm sorry. I know we could probably talk all night about this topic, but I do, again, want to be respectful of people's time. So the question is, how do you handle flashbacks? So if you want to raise your hand, if you want to answer that, we'll end on that question. How do you handle flashbacks? And Desi, I see your hand up. And so serendipitous that it's going to be you anyway, but I will have you hop in and answer that question.
Okay. Flashbacks are a huge thing for me. So like Michael, I actually was diagnosed with dissociation identity disorder. So I, basically it's like a flashback times 10. You basically go into complete shock, your body shuts down. So what happens is you go back into that state of mind and you reenact your abuse, and you have no memory of it. You come back 3-4 hours later and you're have no idea what happened. And then they tell you, oh, hey, you just had this whole flashback came out, but you physically like played out. But I also have regular flashbacks in my head. So there's a couple different things that I do that I know that have helped me and other people as well. There's the 5 senses, which is a huge thing to get you out, to get you in the present moment. So if you don't know what that is, so you put yourself in a safe place, a safe environment, and you do the 5 senses, which is what are 5 things you see, what are 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. When you are in that spot, so if I start having a flashback where I start feeling like I'm going to disassociate, I instantly have to like stop what I'm doing. Okay, I see this, I see a flower, I see my daughter doing this, and start doing that. Most of the time you don't even have to get all the way through them. It helps keep you in the present moment. Being in like reminding yourself you're in the present moment is super helpful. Literally saying out loud to yourself, I am safe. I am no longer hurt. He can no longer hurt me. I'm in a safe place. That's always super helpful for me to just remind myself that you're an adult now. You're no longer a vulnerable child, and you're okay. Or you're no longer in that vulnerable state. You're okay. So whatever the situation is. And then finding your safe place, like no matter where it is. If you live by a beach, mine is like go walk by the beach. I don't live by a beach, so it doesn't happen very often. But if you live by a beach, go walk on the beach. I turn music on and just kind of like literally put my headphones on and just like close my eyes and take a bath. Just put yourself in a safe place. And then another thing is with a safe person. Mine's my husband or my mom, or I call my therapist and just like, hey, I'm having flashbacks. You know, I walked in a garage the other day and it was an instant smell of something that triggered me. And I looked at my husband, we were on vacation. I looked at him and I was like, this smells like a trailer to me. And he just looked at me and he knew. He was like, okay, let's go out here. Let's go stand over here by the flowers, and to kind of help distract me. So yeah, be with people who kind of know how to help pull you out of it. But try these steps, and they're something that helps me a ton, especially with my DID and things like that. So
thank you. I love like tangible, like try this, try this, try this. Cause I think sometimes when we're in crisis or we're freaking out, we're like, someone just give me something to try.
What do I do? Panic.
Yeah. So I really appreciate just like laying out these like concrete, tangible things that people can try out and see if they help. So thank you.
Sure.
And with that, everybody, I think we're going to wrap up for tonight. But on behalf of We Are Her and just the entire survivor community that we are lucky enough to be a part of, just thank you for giving us so much of your time and your energy and your wisdom, your thoughts, your words. Like all of this information is invaluable, and I hope. I feel lucky as hell to just sit here and receive all of this wisdom. So I'm got a lot to think about and process, as I'm sure maybe we all do. But thank you.